2 hours before I died, I saw a being of light approach me and say, "Welcome home." I slipped on a piece of black ice. I hit my head and I instantly died. They telepathically explained to my soul that my work in the incarnation was now completed. And they said, "You may now choose to incarnate in the body of a baby or to go back to the maimed body to serve there. It will be more difficult to go back to the injured body."
Okay, if you've been watching this show for a long time, you've probably used the term STE, spiritually transformative experiences. Well, today we are lucky enough to have Dr. Yvonne Kason, who actually coined this term. And she believes that miracles are possible, and you are not going to believe her incredible story of 5 NDEs and a miraculous healing. So, Yvonne, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi there, Lori. Thanks for having me.
Well, you have had an extraordinary experience. You're also a medical doctor, so you're coming to this with a very scientific brain. This is not woo-woo stuff for you. So, what I'd really love to start with is you had 2 NDEs in childhood. And I think
Mhm.
that this probably was the platform upon which everything else was built. So, can we start there? Would you just explain your childhood NDEs to us?
Sure. I want to point out, I didn't realize for most of my adult life that these were near-death experiences, because as a child, you don't have a yardstick to judge, is this normal? Is this paranormal? It's just stuff that happened to me. But it was about 7 years ago, so fairly recently, since I'm an adult now, that I finally realized, wow, these childhood experiences were near-death experiences too. So the first one, looking back, happened when I was 5 years old, and it was the summer before kindergarten. And I was traveling with my parents, and we had traveled to Switzerland because I had relatives that lived there. And we were at a train station standing on a platform. A lot of people in Europe travel by train. And I saw a station hand jump off the platform, jump down on the tracks, and then climb up on the next platform. And as a little 5-year-old, I thought, oh, that looks like fun. So I immediately leaned forward to jump to do the same thing, to jump on the tracks. And then what happened was it was like time stood still. It was like my life was a movie and somebody had pressed the pause button and just and I was like on an angle over jumping onto the tracks, and my point of perception, my spirit rose up, and suddenly I was like maybe 20 feet or so above my body. And again, it's like time stood still. Everybody stood still. Everyone on the platform, my body in the air, in the middle of a jump. I'm looking down, and from where I was, I could see up ahead what I had not seen before. But a train was rapidly pulling into the station, and I was about to be hit by a train. And I remember that as I observed this, even though I was a child, it was clear to me that I was going to be killed, that I was going to be killed because I was about to be hit by a train. And what's really interesting as I look back is I was not at all afraid. There was absolutely no fear. There was like this incredible sort of stillness and calm. It was more like oh, I see. Oh, yes, I'm about to be killed. I'm about to be hit by a train. Extremely calm. Then all of a sudden, it's like somebody released the pause button on the movie, and a gentleman on the train platform grabbed my little body. I was only 5, pulled me back on the platform, and whoosh, the train pulled in right in front of me, so I wasn't hit. Now, of course, my parents scolded me and blah, blah, blah. But the other interesting thing is the after effect, because after this experience, I started having what I now know are out of body experiences. But as a 5-year old, I didn't know. I thought I could fly because I was flying over the schoolyard, flying over the street. And I remember when I started kindergarten that fall, when you make new friends when you start kindergarten, I said to one little friend that I made there, guess what? I can fly. And that person said to me, no, you can't. Nobody can fly. And I said, I'll show you. And so I climbed up. I remember this so clearly. I climbed up on the little fence in front of our house. I spread out my arms like wings, and I wanted to show my friend that I could fly down the street. And of course, I fell to the ground. And I still very clearly remember my reaction. I was puzzled. I couldn't figure it out because I had such clear memories of flying down the street and flying over the schoolyard. Now I know they were out of body experiences. And I also know that because I had an out of body type of near death experience, that opened my consciousness to more out of body experiences afterwards. But I didn't know that as a kid. It was just cataloged and weird things that happened to me.
That's
So,
that's
mm,
incredible.
and the second one happened when I was 11. And again, I never realized until about 6 or 7 years ago that this too was a type of near death experience. And what happened is I had just turned 11 and it was still, much before puberty. So I was just a little kid. I just turned 11. And I was in a really bad car accident with my family. The whole family was in the car accident. It was quite a serious accident. We went on a deep ditch and the car spinned, and this was before seat belts. Anyway, I ended up with a head injury and I was knocked unconscious and I was in a coma for 3 days after this car accident. Now, all my life, I have always remembered floating above the accident scene, looking down, accurately seeing what was going on, because my father later confirmed to me, things that I saw when I was floating above the accident scene. And then I also have always remembered, it's sort of like my memory jumps to when we were brought to the local emergency department. And I'm now floating above my body. My body is on like an examining table in the emergency department. There were two men sort of huddled over. I assumed they were doctors. And where I was looking from, it was like the ceiling had gone transparent, and I was 20 feet above my body, looking down, watching the doctors, probably trying to resuscitate me, whatever, examine my injuries. And I remember so clearly seeing this big, round, disc-shaped metallic lamp that was hanging over the examining table, but I was seeing it from a top-down perspective. Now, as an 11-year-old, I wouldn't have a clue what a lamp looks like in an emergency department or what it looks like from the top down. And it was interesting because many years later, I trained as a doctor and then I did get to go in emergency departments, etc. And I remember when I first went into an emergency department as a medical student and I saw the big round lamps that they have, I went, yeah, that's exactly what I saw, but from a top down perspective. And again, it never dawned on me at the age of 11 that this was, quotes, paranormal. I thought maybe that's what everybody experienced if they were in a coma for a few days. Anyway, the interesting other thing about that experience, I woke up after 3 days, is after that experience, which I now realize was another near death experience, I could see ghosts. I could see spirits, which now, as a researcher, I know, yes, that's a common after effect after near death experiences as well. People develop mediumistic abilities and can see spirits, but I did not know that when I was 11. and and how I understood it as an 11-year-old. I never even thought they were connected. I thought our house was haunted because we had moved. And so I thought we'd moved into a haunted house, and that was how I interpreted what happened. Anyway, the ability to see spirits, I would say, lasted for maybe a year, maybe a little bit less, and then it slowly went away. So those were my two childhood near-death experiences.
Well, do you want to share the next one that you had, the big one that you had in 2003?
Okay, so that would be my most recent near-death experience.
Yeah, okay, so I know that you had the two in childhood and the plane crash. What was the one in between then?
Oh, I had two in between because I've had five. The plane crash was
Hmm.
in when I was 26. It was a plane crash. And then there was another one in 1995, which was in a near miss plane incident. But I think, just for the sake of time, why don't we jump to my most recent one? Because I think that's going to bring up the most discussion. So, my most recent near-death experience and most profoundly, very profoundly transformative happened on November the 8th, 2003. And on that particular day, I had gone to Niagara Falls, on the Canadian side, Niagara Falls, Ontario, and I was meditating at the base of the falls. And Niagara Falls, in my humble opinion, is a power spot on the planet. And one of the things I like to do, because I'm an empath and very clairsentient, is I like to meditate at power spots. So I was meditating there. And I had a very deep and very profound meditation there, right next to the falls with the roar of the water. It's like the om sound that you can hear inside. And I went into a very, very deep, deep, deep state. And I entered a state of communion with my eyes open. And I've glimpsed communion earlier in my life, but this was, I'd finally found my way back home again. It was really a wonderful, very beautiful experience. And many people describe how shortly before people's death, they will sometimes have very powerful spiritual experiences, end of life experiences. So I don't know, perhaps this was my end of life experience. I wasn't aware that I was about to die. Um, or I finally, in God's plan, reached the goal I'd been striving so much for over many years, to be in a state of unitive communion while eyes open in the world. Anyway, my friend and I was there with a friend. Went and had dinner overlooking the falls, and after dinner, we went back to take a last glimpse at the falls, and I slipped on a piece of black ice in a hidden pothole. I fell back, and I immediately hit my head. Nothing broke my fall. With a big smack, I hit my head on the cobblestone pavement. I had a brain hemorrhage and a traumatic brain injury, and I instantly died. And then what happened was, like, instantly, a force greater than myself whisked my spirit out of my body, and I found myself rushing upwards through this dark, expansive space, a little bit like what behind me, but without the stars. Dark blue, almost black, expansive space towards sort of a portal or an entranceway that was glowing with light. And it was the entranceway to the white light realm, which I, of course, recognized because I'd been there after my plane crash near death experience. And but this time, waiting at the entranceway, sort of to greet me, were two beings of light in luminous light bodies. And I instantly recognized them. They were Paramahansa Yogananda and Mahavatar Babaji, who are two great saints, gurus from my particular spiritual tradition. And they telepathically welcomed me and explained to my soul that my physical body had died. that my work in the incarnation as Dr. Yvonne Kason was now completed. And as I entered the white light realm, there was a feeling of incredible love and incredible joy, celebration. It actually felt like a graduation party was being held in my honor, right? And there were other souls there in the light. I didn't make out who they were other than the two gurus I love that they were clear to me who they were. I couldn't make out who the other souls were, just the feeling of souls that loved me and welcoming me. And um, it was a profoundly beautiful, joyful experience. And I remember for an instant, it's like this ego part of me was like a devil on my shoulder. You know how they show sometimes an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other shoulder? It was like my ego was a little devil on one shoulder. And all of a sudden, the thought comes in my mind, uh-oh, here comes the life review. Because by this point in my career, I'd spoken with many people who had died and then come back, and that when they're clinically dead, many people get a life review, where you see the good, bad, and the ugly. And I mean, I've tried to be a good person, but like everybody else, I've made some mistakes in my life, particularly when I was younger. And I was not looking forward to my life review. This part of me, the devil on my shoulder, was not looking forward to my life review. Anyway, what happened next was so incredibly beautiful because the two saints, the two beings of light, they could read my thoughts. And so they knew that I was having this thought, I was having this worry. And Paramahansa Yogananda just glanced at me. And with that glance, there was this incredible spiritual transmission, and it like blew the devil off my shoulder, like removing a fleck of dust. And in that transmission, the beautiful spiritual understanding that came to me was don't worry about it. And with that came the understanding that the divine, loving, higher power, Mother, Father, God, however we understand the higher power, has such infinite love and infinite understanding that the divine knows, just like a loving parent knows when a child is learning to walk, it's going to stumble, it's going to fall, it's going to make mistakes, it might skin its legs, it might break things, that's all part of the learning process. That the divine understands that's part of our learning process as souls. We're all going to make mistakes. And the divine doesn't want to punish us. Instead, the divine was embracing me, welcoming me with all my flaws and warts, just as I am. It was an unconditional loving. And sort of the sense was an encouragement about don't worry about it. Just try a bit harder next time. You know, that's it. And so I could totally let go of that ego part and I could just open my heart and totally absorb the incredible love on the other side. And then what happened is that I sort of shifted into it's very hard to describe, but into, let's call it an expansive state of consciousness, where if my brain currently, or when I was incarnated in the body, if you compared it to a computer, would be like, say, a Pentium 4, just to use a comparison, is that my brain suddenly became a Pentium 1000 and much faster, much greater capacity, could process vast amounts of information all at once, like integrate the whole thing. And in that expansive state of consciousness, I suddenly remembered all of my past lives. And it wasn't like I was learning something new. It was like remembering something I'd always known but had forgotten. You know, so that's why I call it remembered. And it was all of them all at once. And I describe it like, you know, I don't know if you've ever seen some of these incredible mosaics they have in Europe, particularly in Italy. And if you look at just one little square in the mosaic, it's got beautiful detail and beautiful colors. So that would be like one of the past lives. But when you stand back and you see all of the pieces together, you see, oh my goodness, what a beautiful picture this makes all together. And it's all perfect and it all makes sense. And and that's what happened when I re-remembered all of my past lives. It was an aha experience. It was, I finally knew who I was. And it was a deep healing experience. And I remembered lives, recent ones, thousands of years ago, men, women, different cultures, different colors, it's like I'd been a rainbow. I'd been just about everything over the different incarnations. Sometimes died young, sometimes lived long. But it all made sense. And it was in that expansive state that suddenly my incarnation as Dr. Yvonne Kason made sense. Because that, as I mentioned earlier, is when I saw, aha, I've been having near-death experiences for many incarnations, and I've been having mystical experiences for many incarnations, and I've been having Kundalini awakening for many incarnations. So, on a soul level, my incarnation that I had thought it was a bit weird. I mean, here I am. I'm just this little doctor working in Toronto, Canada. Why am I writing the book on spiritually transformative experiences and having almost all of them? Like, why? But from a soul perspective and a multi-lifetime perspective, it made absolute sense. The other thing I want to point out about being on the other side is that it was very, very clear to me that time passes differently on the other side because I was aware and I understood in this expanded state of consciousness that we here on Earth, we perceive time linearly. There's now, and the future is going to happen, and the past already happened, and we experience this as linear. But on the other side, that's not how I was experiencing time at all. Time could bend, time could loop, and it also seemed like past, present, and future in a way were happening at the same time because it depended on where I shifted my focus of attention. So if I had my focus of attention on what we here perceive as the present, then okay, I'd see the present. And if I shifted my attention to what we here on earth see as the past, I could see the past as if it were happening now. And if I shifted my perception to what we here on earth see as the future, I could see possible futures. And so it was a beautiful and also a clear understanding that time could loop and bend on the other side. For example, after I call it timeless time, what I experienced on the other side. Um, Time was just not passing the same way. After a period of timeless time, the two saints, Paramahansa Yogananda and Mahavatar Babaji, in their light body, reappeared to me. And they telepathically said to me, you may now choose to incarnate in the body of a baby to further serve the divine, and or to go back to the maimed body to serve there. And for me, that was really perfect wording because for many, many years of my life, most of my life, I'd always prayed I wanted to be God's instrument. I wanted to be a divine instrument in whatever way the higher power wanted me to do. I wanted to serve the divine. And so to be asked to serve here or serve there, that was perfect. There's, yes, okay. But I was not shown anything about either option. And I didn't ask. What happened was my soul that was just in this expansive state of love, of trust, of knowing the perfection of the divine plan, my soul just instantly responded, "Oh, masters, please guide me. What is the higher choice? I want to do God's will." And so sweetly, like a thought, how a thought could have so much exquisite love and sweetness is hard to explain, but with exquisite sweetness, they telepathically responded to me, "It will be more difficult, but to go back to the injured body." And immediately my heart that was just wide open without any hesitation, it telepathically said, "I accept." And faster than the speed of thought, it was between the I and the accept that suddenly I found myself back in my body on the ground, breathing a first breath of life back into my body. And at first, the two realms were superimposed. It was like a double exposure photograph. So I could see the world around me in Niagara Falls as I was regaining consciousness in my body lying on the ground. And I could see the realm of light with the two gurus right in front of me. And then what happened is gradually, 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 they faded from view until there was just a little dot. And I was back in my body and I was disabled with this very serious traumatic brain injury. Now, getting back to time, the amount of time that I felt that I was on the other side was much longer than the amount of time that my physical body was dead or unconscious on this time frame. And interestingly enough, I had the opposite experience when I was in the coma at age 11. My memories on the other side are much shorter, and on the physical plane, I was unconscious much longer. So this is what I mean about time looping. So I've experienced time looping both ways. I think time looped and brought me back to my body at exactly the perfect time according to the divine plan.
Wow. Yvonne, oh my goodness, there are so many questions I have for you. First of all, what an incredible experience you had. And I also want to thank you for picking the choice that would bring the highest and greatest good for everybody, because I know you suffered for those 12 years coming back. And I want to talk about that in a little bit more detail, but I want to talk a little bit more about these past lives. So, past lives are so interesting, and it's really crazy to me here in the US that I see in the comments all the time that people have a very difficult time attaching to anything other than we're here having this life, this is it. And I think that that's because religion isn't, at least in the this hemisphere, doesn't really condone anything other than one life. But I think that that was probably changed in the Bible, my opinion.
Yes.
But for you experienced everything. So, first of all, do you have any concept of the number of lives that you have lived on Earth before this one?
Hundreds, if not thousands.
Okay, I'm not surprised at all. Did you also see lives that you lived in places other than the earthly realm?
Yes.
All right. I don't know if you have words to describe these, but
No.
we right?
No,
I
I
know these are
don't.
words are just going to fail us today so massively. In the best way that you can, will you explain some of these lives that were other than human?
I can't do that, and I'll tell you why. Is that you have to remember what I said about my consciousness capacity when I was on the other side. It was vastly expanded, So, imagine AI on steroids. I mean, just vastly expanded. But I've come back to the Pentium 5.
Yeah.
What actually happens now is that imagine we'll use the computer analogy again. Your computer cannot have all the files open. It'll crash, right? And that the computer has a system where when you need a particular file, you go a particular route, you get the particular file, you get it out, and you can't have too many other files open at the same time, or else the computer crashes. So now, even though at the time I had awareness of all of my lives at the same time, now my memory is back to linear. And so when I would say, when by the divine design, it's important for me to have access to one of those memory files. It comes out of the memory bank. And it was, oh yeah, I saw that. Yeah, I remember. And then I get the fullness of that memory. So there were certain past lives that are, I guess, important for me to remember consciously now that I'm back, that those files are open and I can access those pretty quickly. The other ones,
Could you share maybe one or two of those so that we get a better
well,
context to understand?
sure, okay, I will, but just give me a second. But the other ones I'm explained by spirit is on a need to know basis. So on your own computer, you don't have all kinds of random files open. You have the ones open that you need for your current project. And so that is what's happening with my past life memories. I mean, I'll give an example is that I have clear memory of who I was in my past one, two, three, four, about last immediate, about five past lives. And I mean, I'm not going to share details of them. Some of them I was a man, some of them was a woman, Once I was a politician, once I was a lawyer, it's like all these different things. But once I was a priest, once I was a nun, they help me in who I am now to do the mission that Spirit has me on now. And so I think that's my understanding in my heart anyway, is why those data files are open to me. And the other ones, although I remember seeing them and I remember, yes, I totally understood it and all made sense, those files aren't open. So, maybe at another time, Spirit will open some of those other planet memories for me, but currently they're not open to me. While I was on the other side, one of the things that happened in my expansive state of consciousness on the other side is that I remembered all my past lives. And when I did, I saw, hello, this is not my first lifetime having near-death experiences. I've had them in past lives too. And I had a Kundalini awakening in my 20s. And yes, I've had a Kundalini awakening in other lifetimes. And I've had mystical experiences in other lifetimes. So how I now look at it is that my soul sort of carried this, shall we call it predisposition, that I was open to all types of spiritually transformative experiences because of my soul's journey over past lives, which is why I think it started at such a young age and why I think I've had so many not only near-death experiences, but STEs. That's why I could write the book on STEs. I've had almost every one of them.
Wow, I'm so glad that you're sharing that because I read comments that people have sometimes on these experiences, and it's very difficult sometimes for people who haven't had experiences like this to understand how somebody could have more than one or two or three. But you are the first person I've spoken to that remembered past lives and saw that they actually had those experiences previously, which would predisposition you.
In multiple past lives. It's not like
Wow.
in one or two past lives. It's like this is, I would compare this to, say, somebody who's born with a tremendous artistic temperament. It's quite possible that in past lives they were an artist too, and that there's some sort of a carryover in their soul, that they're a prodigy at a young child because their soul is carrying it. I'm not saying I'm a prodigy, but I'll say my soul was clearly open to
Wow.
having all kinds of STEs from a very young age. And
Yes.
I think
Okay.
it's because of past lives.
I agree. Oh my goodness, so much so. I love that you shared the story about your ability to fly. And to you, you probably wouldn't know that other people weren't experiencing these
Mm-mm.
same things at the age of 5. But you mentioned that you realized that they were out of body experiences. And so they were so vivid. And it's similar to these NDEs where people talk about them being more real than real. So, will you speak a little bit about what you've come to understand in all this time about out of body experiences and how they're different than people who have a dream?
Yeah. Well, first off, let me say, sometimes people can have an out-of-body experience in a dream. So they're not mutually exclusive. Sometimes people can have powerful STEs, spiritual awakening experiences in a dream. Some people are open to that. So I don't want to exclude that and say they're not overlapping, because they can be. Um, but as we all know, I think that dreams usually occur when we're physically asleep. Okay, so that is one difference, in that dreams are, and they now rapid eye movement dreams, they can tell with your brain waves when it is that you're dreaming because you're in the REM state. But there's also other states we go into when we sleep. I think it's delta, that's the really, really deep, deep state that we go into. And some yogic traditions say that the delta state in our sleep, which is dreamless sleep when we're not dreaming, we can actually access spiritual levels of consciousness, but we don't remember it when we get out of that state. So sleep is a very interesting thing. So now let's get over to out of body experiences. So your readers, the listeners may not realize, but propelled by my own spiritual experiences, because on top of the two childhood NDEs, when I was 23 and I was in medical school, I started meditating and I had a really powerful experience, which now I know was a Kundalini awakening with a powerful mystical experience. But being in medical school, I thought, oh, well, this is weird. I don't have time to look at this. I just sort of put it in the background. But when I was finishing my residency training, when I was a young doctor already, I was involved in a medevac plane crash and I almost died. And in that plane crash, I had what we now know is a white light type of near death experience. It started with the out of body, then I went into the white light realm and felt the love of God. And it totally changed me, totally woke me up spiritually, made me lose my fear of death, all those things that we know about people who've had near death experiences now. But back when this happened to me, which was 1979, nobody knew about near death experiences. And so as a young doctor, and I was at the University of Toronto, and I ended up getting a faculty position there, I asked all the specialists, my doctor friends, have you heard of this sort of experience? Because I didn't even have a word, I didn't even have a vocabulary to call what had happened to me in the plane crash. And all of my doctor friends and colleagues, they all respected me. They knew I wasn't crazy, but the best they could do was come up with a hallucination theory. That I hallucinated due to a low blood sugar, somebody said. Somebody else said, oh, maybe you hallucinated because of an electrolyte imbalance, or you hallucinated as effect of the cold. And everything about that just was no inside of my heart. This was no. So this propelled me to go on a quest For many, many years, I led a double life. On the outside, I was a mainstream medical doctor. I had a teaching position at the University of Toronto, Faculty of Medicine. But on the inside, I was on like this spiritual quest and I was researching everything I could find about spiritual experiences, paranormal experiences, near-death experiences, Kundalini awakening. So I've been researching this area since the 70s. And I've been researching it because I wanted to know what was happening to me. And I look at it as this was what my calling was in this lifetime. And that according to the divine plan, I was meant to have these experiences. I look at it, I was doing my worldly medical training, and spirit was giving me my spiritual training at the same time, saying, guess what? You're not going to be a regular medical doctor. You're going to be dealing with these types of experiences, which is in fact what ended up happening in 1990 with another very, very strong, what I call my calling mystical experience. Spirit said, enough, it's time to come out of the closet. You're going to go public and you're going to be an advocate for experiencers because doctors, clergy, the public were doing harm by labeling people having these experiences as mentally ill. It's not mental illness. It's part of a spiritual awakening process, and that the human consciousness is capable of much more than mainstream Western society is aware of. So I specialized my medical practice in this area in 1990, and I've been researching it since then. So now we'll get back to your question about near-death experience. I mean, about out-of-body experiences. So when I give you my reflections on out-of-body experiences, I've been researching this for a long time. And also, I was flooded, my practice was flooded with people coming to talk to me about their experiences. So I've heard tons of stories of people over the years having all types of spiritually transformative experiences. Anyway, how I define an out-of-body experience, and some people might define it a little differently, but how I define an out-of-body experience is that it's one type of STE. It's a type of spiritually transformative experience. And in this particular type, people have the sense that their spirit or their soul or their point of perception, however you want to call it, leaves their physical body. And that even though their physical body, maybe it's lying on the bed, or maybe it's sitting there meditating, or maybe it's in a car having a near-death experience, or in surgery having a near-death experience. There are many circumstances when someone can go out of body, but it can also happen when you're dreaming. So, but there's a clear sense when you go out of body, often you can see your physical body. So in the early part of the out of body experience, you look down and go, who's that person asleep on the bed? Or who's that person on the operating room table? Oh, looks a bit like me. Oh, I guess I'm out of my body. Um, and for me as a 5-year-old, when I was flying down the street, I wasn't looking at my body. I was having too much fun flying down the street. So it never dawned on me to look, is my body in my bed doing something? But many people will see their body in an out-of-body experience. And um, some people will have time jumps when they're out of body. Some people will have location jumps that, for example, some near-death experiencers, one of the stories I share in my book is a Vietnam War veteran who said a grenade landed in front of him. He thought he was going to die. All of a sudden, he went out of body and he jumped to the USA where he was above his family and he could accurately see his wife and his children at home sleeping in bed. Some people call this the goodbye tour, when with out of body you go to your family before you cross up into the light. And then all of a sudden he gets nudged in his physical body in Vietnam. His buddy says, hey, we got to move. The grenade didn't go off, so he didn't die. But he had this out of body experience because he thought he was going to die, and he jumped in location to accurately see what was happening on another part of the planet. So, uh, so for me, those are the key elements of an out of body experience. Your point of perception, which may or may not be your soul or spirit, leaves your body, and it may stay around your body or it may go to another location, but then it comes back into your body.
Perfect. That's super helpful. But one other part of that about it, I think that is probably a big key compared to dreams is that you don't just forget these. You know how we wake up from a dream and it might be very vivid, but as the day goes on, it fades a little bit more. As the weeks and months go on, it fades a little bit more. But has that been the case for your out of body experiences, or did you hold on to those more closely in your mind?
Well, one of the characteristics that myself and many other researchers have found about all types of near-death experiences, and there are, in my mind, three main types of near-death experiences. The out-of-body type is one of the types of near-death experiences. The other type is the white light or mystical near-death experience. And the third type is the distressing near-death experience. But regardless of what type of near-death experience somebody has, so this includes the out-of-body type, one of the interesting phenomena is that the memory seems to be etched in your consciousness. And it's nobody really knows why. But yes, the memory of out-of-body experiences during near-death experiences is etched in people's memories. Now, I have to say, some people do forget at first, or they don't remember at first. But they might have a sense of, something happened when I was unconscious. I can't remember. Sometimes it's like the memory is blocked and it might come back to them later. I mean, that has happened to me, that I remembered part, and then all of a sudden something triggered it, like a soul retrieval to, oh, I suddenly remembered another part of my out of body experience that I didn't remember before. And some people have to go on, to see a hypnosis regression therapist, and that in that environment is when they remember. So there are variations about this. So many people remember it right away. And those people that do remember it, it tends to be just etched in their memory for some unusual reason. But there are other people that it seems to be blocked. But once they recover the memory, then it's etched in their memory. It's
Yeah,
an unusual phenomenon.
I know that they've done actual studies on people who have had near death experiences and they've looked at the part of the brain. It is unknown how or why this happens. But to your point, it's not like a memory where we take the memory out, we kind of change it a little bit and put it back in. It doesn't change, it's immutable in that position.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I don't know why, but it is a phenomenon with near-death experiences. And the thing too is that how permanent the memory is. I mean, my first near-death experience happened when I was 5. I mean, I'm a senior now. Like, how is it that I have such clear memory of flying down my street as a 5-year-old? But I do. But you asked me my teacher's name in kindergarten, couldn't tell you, you know.
Mine was Mr.
Uh,
Ross. I do remember
well, I'm
that.
glad you do remember that, but I don't. But I do remember flying down my street. And similarly, 11, when I was in the coma and floating above my body and floating in the hospital, I remember that so clearly. But every one of my near-death experiences, the plane crash near-death experience happened when I was 26. And again, it's like it's etched in my memory. And I had another my fourth near-death experience happened in 1995. Again, hey, that's 30 years ago, but it's etched in my memory. And my most recent one was in 2003. But yeah, the rest of 2003, I can remember bits and pieces of it, but my near-death experience, oh yeah. The other thing, I'm just going to mention this because the memory of near-death experiences is not just a cognitive memory. There's also an emotional memory. And people, like when I start describing in detail about some of my near-death experiences, I start not only remembering the what I saw and what I thought, but I start feeling all the feelings that I felt when I was there. And others, it's the same thing. It's like your consciousness sort of slips back into it, like there's some sort of time portal or something in consciousness, and you start re-experiencing the feelings and the love of God and the awe and the wonder and the peace and all the incredible things on the other side when you're thinking about it. And I mean, that doesn't usually happen when you think about something.
No, and I'm glad that you brought that up. I've had so many people say that, but Yvonne, I think it's by design because you're meant to share these. And so they become authentic in the way that people share them because we know in the brain they're not changed, they're immutable. They don't get changed the way other memories do.
What does happen is how people interpret it might change.
Sure.
How people understand it might change. And I'll just give you an example. Um, when I was talking back in the 90s at a conference in the Bible Belt in the United States, um, I talked about my plane crash near-death experience. And you know, just to share with your listeners, as I said earlier, when I was close to death, I went out of body. I went into the realm that was filled with incredible, loving white light. I immediately, it's like my soul recognized the love I was feeling. I was feeling just such profound, unconditional love. I knew it was the love of the higher power, even though it was not what I had been taught in my childhood religion. It was not an old man with a long white beard sitting on a throne judging me. No, that's not what I was experiencing. What I experienced was that the higher power, what I call God, was like a universal, infinitely intelligent force field of love that is permeates all of creation, all of us, past, present, future. That's what I was actually experiencing and feeling, just the incredible, profound love. And I also experienced, not through words being spoken, but just through like a soul knowing that what I think of as me would live on, whether my body that was, you know, going through a drama below hadn't been rescued yet, whether my body lived or died, that my soul would live on because I was already home on the other side. I was already in the arms of the divine. And I remained in that state until my body was resuscitated, brought to hospital, rewarmed. And then when my consciousness re-entered my body, it felt like a genie being sucked into a bottle. Suddenly, I was sucked in through the top of my head, and I'd been in this expansive place above, and suddenly I'm in the small confines of my body. And then I knew I was back, and it totally transformed me. Uh, it was a profound spiritual awakening experience, but I want to get back to how people interpret them. So I shared this experience with a little bit more detail than I did with you right now to this particular conference that happened to be in Missouri, St. Louis, Missouri. And I remember one person came up to me afterwards and says, "Oh, you are so lucky to have seen Jesus." So I sort of paused and I went, "Excuse me? I didn't say I saw Jesus." "Oh, yes, you saw Jesus." And you know, don't want to be rude, but, you know, actually, no. You know, and he says, "You saw the light, and the light is Jesus." And he's going, "Oh, you're so lucky. Yvonne saw Jesus." And he's walking away. So I'm saying that because it really taught me something about how people will interpret. what they experienced differently. So in all my years of talking to NDE experiencers and STE experiencers, yeah, I'll listen to how they interpret it, but I try to tease away. Let's get past the interpretation. What did you actually experience? And I experienced the white light and love of what in my heart felt was God. But somebody else was interpreting that experience as Jesus. So um, the other thing is that people can change their understanding over the years. I've met many people who had a powerful STE and were not able to find a name to call it. And so the closest thing they were able to find, because it's had a lot of publicity in the US, is near-death experience. So they say, oh, I've had a near-death experience. And I go, oh, that's wonderful. Tell me about it. And then they go and tell me something that's not a near-death experience at all. It's a mystical experience that they had while they were meditating. Or, there can be other triggers for mystical experiences. And so that sometimes creates confusion, or sometimes somebody has a close call, like say they're driving on the highway and something went out of the lane, is coming head on. They think, oh my gosh, I'm going to be killed. But in the last minute, the other car got out of the way and they're not killed. So at the moment that happened, they did not have a spiritual experience. They had a close call. They had a brush with death. But and some people will mistakenly call that a near-death experience when really it was a brush with death that did not include an out-of-body or mystical experience. So it was not, by our definitions, a near-death experience. But this is part of how beautiful the field of spiritual awakenings and spiritually transformative experiences is, because I'm always learning new things. Some people might, after that brush, even though nothing happened at the time, get home and start thinking. And they start thinking, oh my God, there must be a God. I think that's a miracle. I think I've experienced a miracle. And they get on their knees and they start praying, and they then have a spiritual awakening. And so I now have added a new category: spiritually transformative life events. So the event itself didn't create like a mystical experience or an out-of-body experience. But afterwards, as you think about it and reflect about it, that for some people, it can cause like a spiritual renewal or a spiritual awakening. So there are lots of variations of STEs.
Yes, I completely agree. We've talked to so many of them on the show. And I'm also super careful not to take anything away from people. I've had people who have come on the show and explained that they've written a book. They say that they have a near death experience. And to your point, it doesn't fit the
Mm-hmm.
category. It's really more of an out of body experience. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't discount them that way, because if that's what they think that they've had and they want to share it that way. But you're right, it does cause a little bit of confusion. I see it in the
That's right.
comments sometimes.
Yeah, I do the same thing. I honor that everyone is at wherever they're at in their own awakening journey, and everyone has to go through their own process in terms of understanding and integrating whatever types of STEs they have. And if they ask me my opinion of how I would label their particular experience, I'll tell them. And but sometimes I disagree with how people label their experiences, but I just remain silent. It's not, I don't think it's my business to to say anything. Everybody has to pursue their own course. The bottom line, though, is that they're all spiritual awakening experiences. And that's why, I founded Spiritual Awakenings International in 2020 as a big umbrella for people having all sorts of awakenings, with all sorts of STEs or spiritual renewals or spiritually transformative life events. And however they label it, they label it. Like, for example, Kundalini awakening. In some cultures, people call it chi activation. Well, that's okay. Somebody else might call it Shekinah. Somebody else might call it Holy Spirit quickening. That's okay. We don't all have to use the same labels.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, you may not be able to answer this question because you might not have accessed this information, but you did study a lot of this. So I'm curious, in your opinion, do you think that most of the people who are walking this planet right now have had a few to many to multiple past lives? Or do you think that there's a bigger part of the collective who is here maybe for the first time? Any thoughts on that?
Well, your specific question was about past lives. What I have been shown and what I know to be true is that I definitely have had many, many, many incarnations. What I presume from the many, many people I have counseled and spoken with who are going through spiritual awakenings, guess what? They're discovering they had past lives too. So I think probably most people, if not all people, have had past lives. And that starting to become aware of this is all part of the great awakening that's happening right now. That people might awaken in different ways, but as they start awakening, they share certain awarenesses that they start developing. And one of the awarenesses that people start developing is that we are truly souls and that we live on after our physical body dies. That's the first step. And then the next step is, and we incarnate again to continue our soul's learning because we didn't complete it in this particular lifetime. Now, and I talk about this in my new book, Roadmap to the Great Awakening, the dark heart stage of the Kali Yuga is what we are emerging from. And there are still some segments of society and some belief systems in our society that are very dark, very bestial, brutal. I mean, I don't want to point at anything in particular, but um, now, have those souls had less incarnations? I don't know. Maybe, who knows? But I don't know. But what I do know is that this is the time of awakening. And with the awakening, light is emerging. And the light emerges in two ways. The inner light is turned on, and we start awakening within ourselves. And as we're awakening within ourselves, we start seeing our own shadow issues that need to be healed. And that's, I call it the light turned on your inner house. You see the cobwebs in the corner. They were always there. You just couldn't see them before. Now that the lights are turned on, it's like, oops, I've got some work I need to do here. So people in the awakening process very, very frequently, start going into therapy or support groups or counseling or doing inner child healing, recovery work. All of that's really, really important because we're cleaning the house. These are cobwebs from the dark heart stage, from the dark ages. And now that we're awakening, we're clearing the dark heart. But this is also happening externally on the planet because the whole planet is now, light is spreading. And part of the way light is spreading is technology. I mean, you and we're on the internet with Zoom, that in Spiritual Awakenings International, we have online events where people from 114 countries around the world can participate. We have people like Elon Musk who've made X, without any censorship, so that the truth is being exposed. So these were things, you know, there's a lot of upsets and turmoils happening in the world. And sometimes people, particularly when you're awakening and you're really quite sensitive, you can think, oh my God, like there's so much happening in the world. I mean, are we going darker? Some people say that to me. Are we going the wrong direction? Are we going darker? And I say, no, I don't believe that to be true. I think what's happening is that this is part of the Great Awakening. And these atrocities and corruption and darkness and brutality, that's been happening actually for thousands of years. But what's happening now is it's being brought into the light. And as it's being brought into the light, very much assisted by technology, which is also part of what happens during this ascending yuga, is that the electrical age, we have advances in technology. But the purpose is just as when we discover our cobwebs on our inner house, we learn, okay, that needs healing attention now. I look at that as what's happening on the world too, as part of the Great Awakening. These things that are being exposed, shadow issues on the planet, it's so they can be addressed and ultimately healed. And those of us who are having spiritual awakenings will hopefully help to raise consciousness so that we can find solutions that are of a higher vibration, a more spiritual vibration.
So I would love for you to help people who are watching, if they're aware that they are beginning to wake up, can you give them some practical tips of things that they can do that will help them during this time?
Absolutely. Tips to help them awaken? Is that what you're asking me?
They're already awake. They know that they know that they're thinking that there's more than this human existence, but they're searching. They're just
Okay,
newly
yes,
awakening.
got it. Okay, so on my old Purifying the Heart roadmap, the first stage after your awakening is the spiritual seeker, or this is also known as the propelled heart stage. And what's really important if you're newly awakened is to realize this is normal, this is healthy. That this need I have to search and read and explore and do that with gusto. Break out of your box, read, discover different traditions, read from different traditions. A lot of people, when I first had my awakening, I started by deeply diving into my own spiritual tradition. Where I was raised as a Christian, so I was reading the Bible. Then I started reading about Christian mystics. But then, and most people, spiritual seekers, this happens. Then something happens, and I want to try reading a little broader. So you start reading about yoga, or you start reading about Buddhism, or you start reading about shamanism, or you decide you're going to study Kabbalah. That people start exploring different traditions. And I encourage people, do that. Drink from a lot of different wells. That's what Yogananda said. Sample from a bunch of different wells so you can see what feels right for your soul. And try different spiritual practices. I mean, even, some people like different forms of prayer. Some people like different forms of meditation. Well, try different ones. Try going on a sweat lodge, try going on a silent meditation retreat, go on a singing retreat, go on a walking in nature retreat. Try all of these different things. When you're first awakening, it's really, really important to explore and try these different things. But I want to say what the next step is so that people will know where they're headed, because being a spiritual seeker is the first step after spiritual awakening. And I mean, do it with gusto. And some people, they're seekers for their whole life and they're always trying different things or combining this and that. That's fine. Everybody has to follow what their soul wants. But the next stage on the roadmap happens when you find the path that resonates with your soul as your path that's leading you home. And then what happens? This is called the steady heart stage. And that's when people become loving servers and spiritual warriors, where the focus is now of deeply committing to the path. You're finished with tasting all the wells. You found the well that nourishes you. So now you drink deeply from that one and embrace it and do the practices from that particular path and read and study deeply from that path, and your heart is opening while you're doing all of this, try to live by the moral precepts of that path. And what happens when people reach this stage is something happens in their heart as their heart is opening, that they develop a really strong desire to be of service to others. So in the propelled heart stage, the spiritual seeker, it's all about your own journey and your own exploring and your own healing. But when you reach the steady heart stage, the loving server, it's like, no, I want to help others. This is about us awakening. Yes, I'm awakening, but we're all awakening. I want to help others. I want to be of service to others. And people start doing all sorts of volunteer work, or they might change in their profession and their line of work, go into being of service to others. Service to others becomes a priority. And this can sometimes be misunderstood by people who are not in awakenings, and they think, why are you doing so much volunteer work? Why are you not spending more time earning money? And and this is important for people to realize, that this is the next step in the opening and purification of our heart. When we want in our heart, we crave to be a loving server. We crave to be of service to others. And the spiritual warrior, I'll just mention that and I'll wrap on that for today. But the spiritual warrior is the type of loving server who even puts their own self at risk by wanting to be of service to others. I mean, people have said to me, Yvonne, you're a spiritual warrior. And I said, yeah, I am. Because I was risking my medical profession and my medical license by becoming the first Canadian medical doctor to say, this is not mental illness. These are not hallucinations. This is part of a spiritual awakening of consciousness that is healthy, that is positive. And fortunately, through the grace of God, I was able to deal with the challenges I had to deal with from the medical profession, and then to move forward in that work. So yeah, so those are the pointers, and people who want to learn more, I'm going to be talking about the roadmap to the Great Awakening at the Spiritual Awakenings International online conference that's going to be June 6th and 7th online.
We're talking about 2026, just in case you are watching this far into the future, because these videos live on for a long time.
Exactly. And then the video of my keynote presentation will be online. Let me tell you about my new book.
Okay, I would love to hear about it.
Roadmap to the Great Awakening.
Okay.
And because that connects to, it's just coming out. And I'm
Congratulations.
delighted. Thank you. It's my 7th book, the 3rd one I've written since my brain healing, which we haven't talked about yet. In 2016, I had a miraculous brain healing when I was healed from the traumatic brain injury with an explosion of light in the center of my brain. And I was given the strong inner message, pass on what you have learned. Some people have said I was offline for 12 years for refurbishment.
That's cute. I like that.
I like it too. In the Roadmap to the Great Awakening, my newest book, I talk about the fact that I think on the planet, we're in the Great Awakening right
Me too.
now.
Me too. I'm so
we,
I'm so happy to hear you saying this.
yeah, we are in the Great Awakening. It's happening. And in yoga, and I explain this in my book, they have this thing, these ages that supposedly humanity goes through, and it's called the yugas. And the
Mm-hmm.
darkest age was called the Kali Yuga, and that's when Jesus was incarnated to give some light on the planet that was an absolute spiritual darkness. But we're now, according to yoga and other traditions as well, we're now on an ascending yuga, so a time when consciousness is becoming more awake. We're in the next age, which is called Dwapara Yuga. And Dwapara Yuga is the age of spiritual awakening. So I think people that are currently having STEs, like you, like me, we're the crest of the wave. Okay, someone has to be the front runners. So there's a bunch of us that are the front runners. all over the planet. And in Spiritual Awakenings International, that I told you I founded in 2020, we have subscribers from 114 countries around the world, which to me is a confirmation this is happening all over the world. It's a global spiritual awakening. I mean, you and I were in the US and Canada, but it's global. It's an awakening that's happening globally. Now, not everybody is awake. And people are at different points in their awakening or lack of awakening. But my book, you can order it now, whatever year it is. It's hardcover, softcover, ebook, and just coming out now, the audiobook.
Well, let's talk about that. So I'm sure that the people who are watching are so excited to connect with you. And you've mentioned some of these, we've sprinkled some of these little ways that they can do it, but let's formally give them what they need to know. Where can they find you?
Okay. If you want to learn more about my books, I have a book website. It's called DrYvonneKason.com, and that's spelled DrYvonneKason.com. Or you can just go on Amazon and Google, books by Dr. Kason, and you'll see my books. This is my most recent one, Roadmap to the Great Awakening, that I was talking about today. And the other place they can reach me, I'm the president and CEO of Spiritual Awakenings International. And we host online events, speaker events every month, and also experiencers sharing circles where people can come together and confidentially, it's not recorded, share about their own spiritual awakening experiences. We also do that once a month, all facilitated by a facilitator. I'm one of the facilitators. And we also have an annual online conference in June. So it happens to be June 6th and 7th this year, 2026. But if you're listening to this in a future year, go to spiritualawakeningsinternational.org. We also have a website, spiritualconference.org. And then you can see where and when our annual conference is.
Excellent. Thank you. For those who are watching, I'm curious, what about Yvonne's experiences resonated with you the most? Was it her childhood experience? Was it her near-death experience? And even if you've just gotten to the end of this and you're still with us, if you want to write in the comments, waking up the collective, that always helps. But I'm going to ask you one last question, Yvonne.
Mhm.
What do you know for sure?
I know for sure that God is real and that the nature of the higher power, what I call God, is love. And I absolutely know that our souls will live on after our physical body dies.
Beautiful. Oh my goodness. Thank you. Yvonne, this has been such a wonderful conversation. I want to thank you. You have been doing this work for a long time and you made a choice to come back. So I want to thank you for what you are doing to wake up the collective. It is so needed right now.
Mm, thank you. I look at it as a support role, that I see the invisible fingers of spirit is what's waking up the collective. And then people are going, what's happening to me? I need to find somewhere for a framework, how to integrate. I don't even have a name for what's happening to me. Well, that's where Spiritual Awakenings International comes in, and wonderful shows like yours, Lori, to help
Aw.
people find a vocabulary and find a community and integrate what's happening to them. So thank you for what you're doing
Oh,
too.
oh, thank you. And of course, this show is absolutely nothing without all of you who tune in to watch, to listen, and to share these beautiful experiences with somebody who needs them. And if you still have questions, you can join me for Wake Up Wednesdays live at 5 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Mountain, 7 p.m. Central, and 8 p.m. Eastern. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Do you believe that love never dies and you want to hear stories that prove it? Well, hit the subscribe button. You belong here.